feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, we are a little late on this one, but we are talking about Sofia Coppola's Priscilla.
Yes, you ran off and eloped in Aruba.
To an iguana?
No. Yeah, exactly. But you are back, so we are reviewing Sofia Coppola's newest film, Priscilla, shot in the Toronto area. So
Etobicoke.
that's a little. Oh, really? That's where I live. I wonder if it. I have some giant fucking houses around here, so maybe Elvis's house was one of the. No, I live in a tiny condo, but there are gigantic houses around me. I'm excited to be back talking this with you. We just recorded our review of The Marvels, which you guys can go listen to or watch right now. It should be up. It was a gigantic spoiler-filled conversation, mostly about The Marvels, but we also talk about the future of the MCU, as well as the series and TV shows and films and how slowing down and pumping the brakes and getting a little distance in between releases might be a good thing. So please go check that out. If you like Priscilla, you'll love The Marvels. That's not a true statement. I don't know. I'm just Eric. How are you?
I'm good, Matt. I don't know where you were going with that, but I'm happy to be reviewing this film, especially anytime I get to criticize Baz Luhrmann's Elvis,
Right,
which I will
sure
be doing quite a bit during
Yeah.
this review. So.
We just had a very Elordi Christmas because we had Priscilla and Saltburn very close to one another. We'll also have a Saltburn review up probably soon-ish because it does come out in the next couple weeks, right?
Yeah.
So we will have that up soon. But good for Jacob Elordi, you know?
Yeah, I mean, he's more of an edgelord in Saltburn than he is in Priscilla, edgelordy. But yes, here he is playing Elvis, but as a supporting character, because this is from the perspective of Priscilla Presley. Before that, Priscilla Beaulieu. And this is her story that kind of spans from the late 1950s into the early 70s, and her relationship and marriage with Elvis, and her time at Graceland and fighting for autonomy and freedom and becoming her own person. The first time we meet Priscilla Presley is when she's 14 years old and she's living on an Air Force base in Germany, West Germany. And with that character, we see a world that's very desaturated and there's no life to it. She's kind of going through the motions of school and feels lost in translation in a way. And so as we see this character kind of succumb to the charm of Elvis Presley, who at this point was enlisted in the military as a regular soldier, he's 24, she's 14. Very creepy, very disturbing. We see the grooming. It's not overt, but it is there. The subtle sort of idea of, him trying to seduce her and win her over, and in a kind of Vertigo kind of way. He just lost his mother, is kind of, taking that loss and replacing his mother with a potential spouse partner, and he sees that in Priscilla. And every time Priscilla interacts with Elvis in the early scenes, we see that color temperature change. The pastels and the warmth get brighter. This film isn't about plot. It's about sort of living within the moment and in the palatial setting that the characters are languishing in. And so when you see Priscilla over the course of so many, decades kind of come into her own, you see this young girl become a woman, but also have to navigate a very tricky terrain of sort of not becoming just another trophy for Elvis to place in Graceland and just become something that sits within the confines of, his building and in his life, and that he is taking advantage of her in more than one way. And Cailee Spaeny, who plays Priscilla Presley in the film, is phenomenal. That transformation of going from child to adult is also very, very subtle, just in terms of posturing and mannerisms, but even makeup and learning things and observing things and seeing how the daydream is becoming reality over time.
And a nightmare at times too. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm with you. I like the film quite a bit. I think Sofia Coppola, her movies are always very deliberately paced, and I think it's more of a me problem than a her problem, that they kind of lull me into this, like I'm both mesmerized by them, but then it also kind of lulls me into this kind of disassociation from reality sometimes too, where
You enter a fugue
I
state.
yeah, like when I'm watching her films, like I sort of find myself daydreaming sometimes or drifting off. And um I don't know if it's the film's fault all the time or if it's just that her style doesn't vibe with me. But it ends up winning me back usually throughout each movie that I see from her, where I end up really liking her stuff for the most part. But I find myself wrestling with like how much I enjoyed it, because I found myself at times drifting off or not being fully engaged with it. That being said, I think that transition you're saying from Priscilla being this kind of suburban kind of young woman who is kind of seduced by this older man and this kind of fame and things like that. And it does get disturbing and creepy in subtle ways, right? Like it does play it very much as a romance, but a romance that is a horror film, right? Like it is very romantic, and he's in his wooing of this young woman, and it's played off very romantically, but the subtext while you're watching, even though it is kind of these pastels and these and it is almost charming, but charming to the point where it reverses and becomes horrific and disturbing and creepy, right? Because of this relationship that they're having, and him kind of taking advantage of this young woman and
Well, a
her
girl when they first meet,
young
right?
girl and her um naivety and stuff like that too. So I think the movie does a really great job of that, at playing it as a straight romance, but then as you're watching you go, oh no, this isn't, as much as the movie is showing it as a romance, and it's intentional. I'm not saying that the movie is trying to play it off as this love story. While you're watching it, even though it's played very straight, it is very disturbing while you're watching it, which I think the movie does a really, really good job at that. I think the casting of it's Cailee Spaeny, right? Yeah, Cailee Spaeny and Jacob Elordi. I think the height difference plays great into the disturbingness of it. Like he really feels like a man, and she does feel like a young girl at times. And when I say that plays great, it's because this story, I think people brush off a lot of when he met her, being like, well, he was in his mid-20s and blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, there was still a 10-year age gap. She was still a girl.
She was underage.
Yeah, like
he was a pedophile. Elvis Presley was a pedophile. It is clear that way. Like I just started to cut you off there, Matt. I think the most important thing that this movie is doing is it's not judging people for liking the music. It's not saying, oh, you can't like the music. It's saying you have to accept the fact that she was a 14-year-old girl.
Yeah.
He was 24.
I agree.
That's unacceptable. It doesn't
and I
matter
agree with that. And the
if
movie
you
doesn't
are Joe
pull any
Schmo
punches.
or Elvis Presley. That kind of shit should never fly.
It
even
shows
in that
it does fly when you have fame, and that
Yes.
you know, and things like that. And that's what I think the movie does a really great job at. All her interactions with Elvis and his entourage. Like I joked about this after I saw the movie, being like, this felt like a season of Entourage directed by a feminist and taking the perspective of one of Vinny Chase's girlfriends or something, right?
Well, they
like
call him E though too,
yeah,
right?
That's funny. Yeah. But like there are some sequences where she's trying on clothes for them and stuff like that, and they all are towering over her, and she does really look like this child surrounded by men,
playing dress up.
Yeah, that it becomes very disturbing and very creepy watching the entire thing. And she just does such a great job with it, of playing it as this young girl who is in love, but is being taken advantage of because of, that age difference, really. Like, so yeah, I think the movie is quite good. I thought the performances were great. Everything you mentioned, I pretty much fully agree with. My only kind of issues were, Sofia Coppola's pacing sometimes. I think I just doesn't really vibe with me. And I feel like the last act of the film rushes by too quickly. And you had a good anecdote of why that might be the case when it comes to drug use and different things like that. But for me, it spends a lot of time on those early years, and then once they get married, spoilers, uh it kind of goes by too quickly for me. Like, I feel like it starts to rush through that last act of their downfall for the most part. And you saw that throughout their relationship and how he could be abusive in different ways, verbally and physically at one time, and stuff like that too. But once that stuff starts happening and they start having issues after they get married, and you're starting to see the cracks and how they kind of drift apart, I feel like it goes through those years very quickly, to the point where I thought there were some pacing issues with that first two acts of the film and then the last act. So I think that's like my biggest issue with the film as a whole. But overall, I think it's great to tell her side of the story. I think it doesn't pull any punches when it comes to, Elvis being one of the most beloved musicians of all time, but showing that, hey, there's this part of him and his history that we kind of all brushed to the side as it was okay, when it really wasn't okay. I agree with you, and I'm glad that this story was told, and it's told in a respectful and in a stylistic kind of way, with some great performances. So I think the movie's quite solid.
Yeah, and it never judges Priscilla Presley for her
No.
choices, and it's based on her memoir, which was co-written by Sandra Harmon, Elvis and Me. And when you're watching this story, it respects Priscilla Presley as a person, and you see, this person as a child, and moving into adolescence and adulthood, and having needs and desires, and wanting more in life, and not wanting that much more. I mean, she wants to just get a job at like a boutique, and kind of just have a little bit of autonomy. And the way that Elvis looms quite literally large over her like a monolith, and telling her, you have to be this way, you have to be preserved if as though you're a Barbie doll, and you need to be kind of kept in a precious state, the way that he calls her little one, or baby, and things like that, and his choices of not to have sex with her until a certain time and a certain age. Like, he knew what he was doing. He manipulated her, and he was also very much aware of how the public would possibly perceive him, because this was also around the same time that Jerry Lee Lewis was dating and eventually married his cousin. So, and she was 13. So, you get to that point where you see, you hear the Colonel. Luckily, there's no one playing him in this movie. Tom Hanks doesn't randomly pop up like a jump scare, but the idea of the tabloids really emphasizing Elvis's relationships with Anne Margaret and Nancy Sinatra, is to play up the fact that it's like, okay, it's distracting you from what's really going on over here. And then when Priscilla became rock and roll royalty, it was of age. And so a lot of that was kind of kept under wraps. But, if you look at Michael Jackson or Woody Allen or Roman Polanski or Charlie Chaplin, even Babylon last year, like, you can still like the music, you can still like the movies. There's the conversation of, the art imitating the artist, or separating the two. But you have to accept the fact that Elvis was a pedophile, and you have to accept the fact that, like, that's a part of who he was. And if you don't, then you're being ignorant to Priscilla's journey. You're being ignorant to her truth, And so that's something where this story is told in such a sensitive way. And I think the pacing of it, I don't disagree with you. Like, her movies very much are about living and breathing within a space of time, and just kind of almost hanging out with the characters, where you can easily disconnect or feel like, you are almost, tuning out in a way. But what I think works about that third act, even though I think the thing that I really didn't like about this movie is the depiction of LSD drug use, because the visual
great
aspect
point.
of
I forgot about that. Yeah,
is terrible. It's pretty bad. But I'll say this in general. I don't think there are many movies that really have shown drug addiction in a realistic manner that kind of doesn't feel
when it's used in a
cheesy or
comedy,
movie-ish.
it's fine, but like when it's, and even then it's sometimes not done,
but it
super
feels
well,
comedic unintentionally when they're tripping out on LSD and reading philosophy, and because it is such an intimate story, that's where I will give Baz Luhrmann credit, where the bombastic nature and the maximalist sort of elements of that film kind of give into the hedonistic qualities of a pop or rock star kind of succumbing to all the temptations, where it kind of feels like, this does have a little bit of amateur kind of quality to it. It's a little tacky. The direction's not great. The acting kind of feels a little bit awkward and arch within it's also with like, just even like with drinking. I think when you have characters who are alcoholics in film, you border on caricature or stereotype, and it's just really hard to depict that in dramas specifically, as you're mentioning, because when it's a comedy, when it's Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, it's kind of goofy and funny. But when it's Priscilla, it feels like it takes you out of the movie a little bit. The other thing that's interesting that doesn't hurt the film in any way whatsoever is there's no Elvis music. They couldn't get the rights to license the music of Elvis.
Surprise.
But the music choices that are used within this film work, and usually that's not the case, because you've had the David Bowie Stardust movie, which they couldn't get the rights to the music, the catalog of his didn't work. It was like, what's the point? You had the Jimi Hendrix biopic with Andre Benjamin, couldn't get Jimi Hendrix's estate on board. What's the point? It's about the artist, but here it doesn't really matter.
It's not about the music. It's about Priscilla, right? So you don't. I completely agree with you there. You know what? Until you just said that, didn't even notice.
Exactly, right?
Which is a good thing.
You don't notice. And a lot of her music, like someone like Tarantino, she takes stuff that's maybe not even decade appropriate. It's more so about like the feeling of, how this character is at certain points of her life, whether she be a teenager, whether she be a young adult, what she's listening to at the time outside of Elvis, or what Sofia Coppola feels is kind of almost in a way avant-garde within sort of juxtaposing more contemporary sort of music, because she's done this before with period storytelling with Marie Antoinette. So you have those elements as well. So there's a lot to like here. It's not perfect by any means. It's not Lost in Translation, which I still think is her best film, but it is a really well-made biopic, and I think like I'll take 100 of these, especially if they're directed by someone who has such a distinct voice and style like Sofia Coppola, than a traditional biopic, and I mean, even that's even coming into conversation now. And I talked about this actually recently on Cinema Scene, where Christopher Nolan talked about Oppenheimer not being a traditional biopic, and what a biopic, or the definition of a biopic, even means anymore, because you get the classic cradle to the grave stories, but I think we are starting to get more sort of focused narratives that are on a point in time in a person's life, whether it be the decades or just even a few months, or the thing that they're known for the best. We've gotten Oppenheimer. I mean, even something like Killers of the Flower Moon, which isn't a biopic about someone historically famous, but just in terms of the people that were involved.
And we've talked about that for a long time, that's the best type of biopic, right? Like
Social
the Cradle
Network,
to the Grave one is not
Steve
it
Jobs
anymore. Yeah,
those are the two that I think really changed the pace of what a biopic can be, and the influence of like, okay, we don't need to do that classic story.
Wikipedia page kind of here's everything about their life. And I think that's where my issue with the last act of this movie is like, I felt like it needed to show us those later years where it could have just been them falling in love and you hinting at what, because we all kind of know what happened, right? For the most part, like I'd say,
Yeah, Priscilla Presley stars in The Naked Gun. We know what happens.
yeah, and Riley Keough is here, and I like her, but I'm just saying, like I always forget that she's Elvis's granddaughter. But I think you could have even like chopped out most of that last act and fleshed out even those first two acts a little bit more, and then like ended with them having a little bit of issues instead of showing me the birth of Lisa Marie, showing me like their divorce and all of that kind of stuff. And I feel like there could have been a more interesting way to end it where it was even more laser focused on one point of their life. Even though this movie does do what you're saying, it just, for me, went on. If you're going to do it, I felt like you just threw in that extra shit at the end. And we're like, well, you kind of know what happened, so let's show it to you very quickly. And some of the drug stuff, I agree with you, doesn't work super well. But overall, I still think definitely worth seeing. It's playing at Lightbox right now. I think it's still playing there in Toronto, which is the best cinema probably in Canada. I'll argue that, at least from a
technical point of view.
Technical standpoint. That's what I was going for. I'm going to give the movie a 3.5. I think it's good. Some of those issues, like I said, with the pacing and certain things, just stopped it from being amazing for me. But I still think it's a pretty solid movie. So 3.5 for me.
Yeah, I'm also going to give it a solid 3.5 out of 5. I think the performances, particularly Cailee Spaeny, but also Jacob Elordi, are both great. I think the period detail and attention is there. The cinematography, we already mentioned it at the beginning, but again, like just the idea of externalizing her feelings, whether, she's not with Elvis at the beginning when she's younger as a girl and seeing that desaturation, but anytime she's in her fantasy world or feeling good, the color temperature changes, and then how that plays out even when it does change in terms of, I don't want to spoil anything, but I don't really know what spoiler is here.
It's none of it's spoilers.
No. So when she, the more she gets to know Elvis and the more the relationship turns, that desaturation comes back, and that it's
even
only
her
a temporary
hair color and things like that.
And that's where I was also talking about like the Kim Novak thing in Vertigo, where you see it's almost like Elvis is Jimmy Stewart trying to turn Kim Novak, his lost spouse, into replicating her and turning her into something else, and that grooming and control and sort of suffocation of life, to the point where like he's reading philosophy in bed and she's like, stop, I can't take this anymore. This is like part of me is like, good for you, because like philosophy is one of those things where it's such a bore sometimes, and if you're not into it, it can be so, it's insufferable. So it's a really solid little film, but I just think like in terms of Sofia Coppola's filmography, if you're looking for Lost in Translation, you're not going to get it. But even just thinking about, Coppola also shot her first movie in Toronto, The Virgin Suicide, so it's just kind of interesting there as well.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Thank you all for listening or watching. We really do appreciate it. You can check out our other reviews that we have up right now for things like The Marvels. We'll have reviews up for Poor Things and Saltburn if you want some more Elordi. What else we got coming out, Eric?
May, December, we've got that, and an interview with Todd Haynes actually coming up. Yeah. And then I think that's, we've got Wish is coming soon.
Yep, Disney Wish. You guys can check out our TIFF recap. We have a bunch of TIFF reviews, our TIFF recaps over on the Untitled Movie Podcast channel. And we'll also have a vacation episode coming up soon, which should be a lot of fun. Eric's going to talk about his Aruba vacation. We're gonna try to theme it as like the best places to go for movie lovers, like the Sopranos Piano Bar in Aruba, and Disney World and Universal Studios, because I did do that big trip earlier this year where I went to Walt Disney World and I went to Universal Studios Orlando, and I rode some of their newest rides over there. So I still want to talk about all that. So I think we're going to do a big vacation episode, which should be a blast over on the Entitled Movie Podcast. So you guys can check that out as well. One-stop shop for everything. Just head over to Letterboxd, which is Untitled_movies. You'll be able to find everything over there. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And you can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on all the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
I would have given this movie 5 stars if the last scene was Priscilla Presley was in her office and she got the script for the Naked Gun movie. That would have been perfect.